Now I request Mr. Andrew Bacrau, the research scholar from Nalanda University, to speak on the will and functional role in action theory.
Sir, I am Dr. S.M. Devaliya, General Fellow of ICPR from Sagar, Madhya Pradesh. My question is to respected speaker from Nepal who read the paper on theory of fearism. There are my two queries. First query is, you said that fear is a beautiful consciousness, and you also mention in your paper fear is just like a sorrow as in Buddhism. So how can you justify that fear is a beautiful consciousness? This is my first query. Now second query, your all philosophy is based on theory of fearism. So I want to know what is the place of concept of pleasure in your philosophy, or any other word, what is the metaphysics of your philosophy? Is your philosophy consider the immortal soul or God or the concept of rebirth as in the Buddhism? There is no the concept of immortal soul, but he consider the theory of rebirth. So what is the metaphysics of your philosophy? Thank you.
So, good evening all. I would like to start by thanking the HSRC for hosting. Thank you to all the staff and everybody helping out. It's been a fantastic conference. My paper is concerned with a comparative paper between how Eastern philosophy as well as Western philosophy may have some underlying similarities in terms of how we discuss the role of will in terms of volition and action formation as a self-cognition agent. Okay. So the research aims are to provide a conceptual bridge between Eastern and Western philosophy, and also to contribute to the developing nature of will. Now, just like in any philosophy or in general humanities papers, there are methodological limits. First one would be that the central philosophy of the Eastern side that I'm trying to focus on is the Manipura chakra from what is conventionally known as the Kundalini system. However, arguably, the chakras have originated during the Upanishads, though the core center, the source of knowledge that has inspired the Upanishads and later any form of Brahmanism or Kashmiri Tantra or so on, have their roots in the Vedas. And because of that, throughout this historical time lapse, there have been plenty of recyclings of different interpretations and so on of this kind of Vedic philosophy that initially started in India. Also, the innermost interpretations are rarely presented to for Westerners as well as for academic debate, because when we discuss issues such as Kundalini or anything similar, there is a very deep sense of spiritual awareness or spiritual path that has to be followed when we discuss such concepts. And because of that, usually such tantras come with a sense of secrecy or come with a sense of not having the ability to share them with an academic space. Therefore, what I'm going to be focusing on is what we can currently share within the academic sphere when it comes to the Manipura chakra. There are also personal topical limitations because from a personal perspective, I am a Buddhist. I am analyzing when I'm doing this paper throughout a perspective of Anatman and so on, which may not necessarily coincide with the ontological necessities to discuss the Manipura chakra. So perhaps I might not be the best at creating this parallel between the Eastern philosophy as well as Kant. However, throughout my lens as well as my training, I am trying my best to create these kind of conceptual bridges. Also, in Western philosophy training, there is this dichotomy between analytic and continental philosophy. Continental philosophy is usually regarded as what we know as the Greek classics, Kant, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Foucault, and so on. And the later on developing tradition, which is the analytic philosophy, developed in the mid-20th century, and it is very concerned with analysis, with logic, and what they claim is a more clear and transparent way of discussing philosophical arguments. Now, because of my training, it was better for the audience that I initially wrote this paper for to be in a more analytic format, in the sense that, you know, throughout this conference we have for many poetic descriptions of consciousness, of the self, and so on. And although these are beautiful and definitely have a place in philosophy, this kind of paper is rather focused on the more analytic and logically oriented ways of describing consciousness. And the thesis of the paper is that the yellow chakra, Manipura, is akin to the will found in Western philosophical thought. Akin means similar, not necessarily exactness, so that can be further elaborated as well. The self has been very broadly defined throughout the paper as an experiential consciousness, also the kind of consciousness that can internalize, interpret, and express the experience that the conscious enactor has. If anybody has any further questions about this self-theory, we can further discuss it in Q&A or in private. Now, these are some of the functionalities that are similar with Western psychology, because when I was trying to discuss this East and West dialogue, I wasn't only strictly concerned with discussing the Western philosophical concepts, but also the way contemporary psychology in the West discusses the will, the self, and so on. The reason why I chose this kind of analysis is because there are some criticisms from scientists and people that tend not to study philosophy, that philosophy is just merely some abstract, intellectual discussion that has no benefits or implications for the practical world, for scientists alike or politicians and so on. So therefore, I'm using some experiments from Western psychology to show that there are not only similarities between philosophy and science, but also between Eastern and Western philosophy alike. Throughout the research, it has been unraveled that both the Manipura chakra as well as Western psychology discuss this will, this kind of volitional capacity that an agent has as not an infinite amount of energy or stamina or so on. For example, even people that work in Congress or parliaments or so on, when they are engaged in discussing issues, they become exhausted after a while. Throughout the day, it is very hard from a cognitive perspective to maintain a strong intellectual and reasoning sharpness throughout the day when there's a lot of significant decisions to be made. And also both the Manipura chakra as well as Western concepts of the will are concerned with self-management, self-control, and this kind of exercise in a more biological sense is discussed as muscle exertion, mental concentration, or other activities that require effort. Some other papers were also discussing it as a source of inhibited control that are behavior, and some psychologists would argue that without this kind of inhibitory control of the so-called volition, people would merely be reacting to stimuli. For example, in a more Indic concept, for example, it would be people being barely stuck in the first two chakras, the Muladhara and the, pardon my Sanskrit, let's just call it the orange chakra, right? So those are usually discussed even within Indian philosophy as being rather animalistic or impulse-based kind of emotive states of consciousness or the self. Another more particular example of Western psychology that I was using is an experiment by De Waal. So what basically De Waal and the other researchers were doing is trying to have a more empirical understanding of that kind of exercise of volition that I was describing earlier. Meaning, they took two different samples of people and they were trying to monitor their aggression. For one sample of people, they consciously told them that the role of the experiment was to control their aggression, whereas the other set did not have that information. And throughout that kind of social conditioning, the experiencers were trying to engage with the subject in the sense of they were trying to arouse a sense of anger, a sense of aggression within the subjects. And the people that were aware that the purpose of the experiment is to mitigate the aggression were successful in understanding that they were not only rather more successful in having the capacity to do so, but after the experiment was over and the survey was conducted, the people that did manage to mitigate aggression were actually in fact more exhausted, more tired after the experiment. 5 minutes. Okay, so I've been told there's 5 minutes. So parallels with Kant, I've been looking at the critique of practical reason. Similar to the Manipura, the will is the starting point of our actions. It helps us redesign our subjective experience towards infinite progress, and our freedoms are understood by a capacity of the will, freedom as self-legislation. Kant is a philosopher that is very legalistically oriented. He was very concerned with finding an object of moral reasoning. Surely, throughout these conferences, we've been talking about the subjectivity of moral experience, the subjectivity of self. However, in contrast, Kant was very concerned with transcending that kind of barrier between the subject and the experience of the subject, and rather try to explain that there's an external object of moral reasoning that enables the subject, the conscious self, to understand what the meaning of morality is. This is a fascinating quote by Kant that kind of helped me bring together his understanding of the phenomenal self with what is academically discussed as the Kundalini self-cognition. And yet this is not to be a principle very possible through understanding, but only for that which gives nothing manifold through its pure apperception in the representation I am. An understanding which through its self-consciousness could give the manifold of intuition, and by through representation the objects of that representation should at the time exist, would require a special act of the synthesis of the manifold for the unity of its consciousness, while the human understanding which possesses the power of thought only, but not of intuition, requires such act. Though there might be some disagreements with any post-Vedic philosophy in regards to whether or not intuition is a salient cognitive tool for the mind, what is interesting, and it was very helpful for the paper, is this unification of apperception between how Kant discusses how the self is formed as a cognitive process of different sensorial tools of the body, and also similarly how the Kundalini theories discuss the elemental, or rather the energetic combination of the chakras to ultimately enable the conscious subject to understand. Throughout the paper, I'm discussing potential criticism that may arise both from other Western philosophers as well as later on some Buddhist criticisms. So even though Manipura throughout the paper have been argued to be similar to a concept of will or volition, either by Kant or Western psychologists, does this truly mean that they are the same? The paper tried to hold that yes, there's a very important, striking similarity between how we discuss the will in both the Eastern and the Western kind of philosophical concepts. As far as differences, though, it is very important to note that Kant, as well as Western psychologists, are concerned with both the self and objects of moral reasoning and cognition through external objects, right? And this may come as a differentiation because in Hindu or any post-Vedic cosmology, there's also tantric practices and so on. So there's some sort of differentiation as to what the tools that are available to actually discuss and understand such concepts. And more on the Buddhist side, surely there are Buddhists that believe or have some sort of paradigm for chakra systems, but these are more Buddhist criticisms that would come from Theravada or non-tantric Mahayanist practitioners. For example, usually the chakra systems assume an Atman, or more often than not, when we discuss a system of chakras, we discuss an Atman that enables or cognizes or uses such chakric energies to enable the self to do action. And again, in Buddhism, the Buddha himself stated the Anatman theory, where there is no such self that cognizes the I, there's no such self that is necessary for the volition, and so on. Some other criticism from the Buddhist side may be in regards to other major doctrines such as impermanence. And yeah, also there's been a Libet's research, which I may not be able to go through in 5 minutes, so thank you, and yeah, I'm open to questions as well.
I thank Mr. Andrew. Sorry for interruption, but at 6:30 we have to gather, and still our chair also has to address. And your paper, which had explanations on will from formal philosophers, and you also tried to connect it from a spiritual angle. Thank you very much. Now, I leave it to the chair, Professor A.P. Dupe, who is Professor of Philosophy at Sagar University, Madhya Pradesh. He is also the Dean of the faculty there. Now I leave it to the chair only. Okay, then I request the questioner to have direct talking discussion with Professor Limbu outside the hall.
Good evening, friends. First, I like to thank the governing body of APC who invites me as a chairperson of this parallel session. And secondly, I like to thank Professor Vyas who easier my work to comment on all the paper readers. So, I am thankful to Professor Vyas also. Friends, in this session, here are 3 papers were presented. Because of shortage of time, I summarize myself and conclude with few words. The first paper writer was Swami Deepakanand ji, and his topic was from impure consciousness to pure consciousness. Actually, when I see that this title of the paper, so I was a little bit confused so about the consciousness, ki how consciousness is pure or impure. I don't think consciousness is impure anywhere. But at the end, I was fully agree with Dr. Deepakanand ji. He covers the theory of relativity and the latest theory of Big Bang. जगत निमित्त एंड नैमित्तिक, जगत को निमित्त एंड नैमित्तिक बताया जिसमें in the end the paper reader is very scholarly established the difference between pure and impure consciousness, but still a question in my mind, how soul will impure. So I will talk to him in another occasion. But I congratulate you, you established purity and impurity of consciousness. So I congratulate you. Second paper was written by Desh Bahadur Limbu. I personally very much impressed with the Limbu, and I congratulate you. You have established a new kind of fear theory. Actually, the word was fearism is very holistic. It includes terrorism and so many non-violence activities. But the Limbu established another type of fearism that is related to jijivisha. That is, I congratulate him, and I am agree with this conclusion of Dr. Limbu. The third one is Mr. Andrew, whose title was, he is a research scholar. His title was The Will and Its Functional Role in Action Theory. He is a research scholar, but he very well, he explored the idea of will and relation to action. He is a research scholar, but I appreciate his approach, and congratulate him for future also. At the end, I feel myself lucky to witness the scholarly written paper and scarcity of time with these words, Once again, I congratulate to all paper readers and Dr. Devalia who raised the questions and queries. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dubey. As writing papers and presenting the papers, understanding the ideas is a sadhana. Even listening to these ideas very quietly and allow our mind to roam freely in connecting at a higher level is also a sadhana. So from that angle, both the speakers as well as listeners, I thank them for carrying this session to a successful end. And now I request the chair of this Holistic Science Center to present mementos on our behalf, and afterwards we will all gather in that main hall inside the institution of Holistic Science Center.